Just another moment while the live stream gets going. And we're all set.
All right. Hello, everyone. Calling this meeting to order, the Salem Parks and Recreation Advisory Board meeting of November 9th, 2023. So good to see you all. And the chair, Dylan McDowell, let's move into our roll call. So going down the list, Keith Norris is absent tonight. Alan Alexander, do not see. Woody Dukes, don't see. Rick Hartwig.
Here.
Al Holland.
I'm here.
Joan Lloyd.
Here.
And Debbie Miller.
Here.
Wonderful. Well, great to see you all tonight. I hope everyone's been having a great time, hopefully enjoying some of the wonderful foliage we have in the parks. It's been kind of a week in terms of some of the sunshine we've got. And I don't know where you all are, but Mickey over here in West Salem, the trees have been particularly vibrant this week. Let's move into our approval of the minutes. So I missed you all at the last meeting. I see this as July 2023 meeting minutes, but I think we're looking at the October ones and the agenda there. So do folks have any adjustments or edits to the minutes from last meeting? Yes, Rick.
Yeah, I just have there's just a typo in the revised 2024 city budget. It says Vice Chair Norris discussed a draft letter to City Council regarding the city budget revisions. It says Member Hartwig comments, then there's a mysterious T. The letter was very well written and her supports it. So we just need to change her to a he and take out that mysterious T there, and then we're all set. And I would make a motion to approve the minutes with that change.
Those seem very reasonable. Do we have a second? I hear Joan seconding. All right. Any further discussion? Yeah, Debbie.
No, I meant in favor.
Sorry. All in favor, say aye. All right. Any opposed, say nay. All right. Our minutes are approved. Sorry about that, Debbie. Got a little confused there. All right, we'll move into our public comment. Is there anyone, Carol, were you hoping to provide some public comment tonight?
Yes. Salem Parks Foundation is approaching the legislature again regarding Eco-Earth, since the legislature didn't really function well in the spring. And so the issue that we had brought to their attention didn't even get on the docket anywhere. So we're back at them again. The Cultural Advocacy Commission of Oregon presented a slate of cultural things around the whole state, and the Eco-Earth Ball was one of those. And we went around and talked to all the legislatures about supporting it, but then, as I said, nothing happened. So we're going to be doing that again, and maybe this time they will approve it. It's a grant from lottery money for $150,000. So we're hoping that when I get the bill number, I'm going to tell everybody what that is. So when the legislature does meet in February, anybody can contact their legislator and suggest that they support that bill. But that's all I have.
That is great. I appreciate that. One question I had, you said it was a $150,000 grant. Could you remind us of the full amount needed for the Eco Globe restoration and how far you all are on current donations?
Yes. It's the full amount needed is $400,000, and we were going to put up one of those thermometer things when we reached halfway mark. We're at 47%, so we're going to go ahead and put one of those up somewhere near Eco-Earth to show where we are raising money, and maybe that will inspire people to send some more money in. So we have $188,000 is there of the 400,000. So
wow,
we're almost to halfway. So we think that's close enough to put up a fundraising thermometer to show the progress. And we've already put it on our Facebook page, but we'll get it up as a physical thing soon, we hope.
Well, that's really impressive. I mean, congratulations. It's a lot of money raised, and it really shows how effective you all are at raising money for these different efforts. And seems like with the legislative money, if approved, that gets us pretty close. That's great.
Yeah.
Al, I see you have a question.
I'm just curious to know what fundraising activities are in the future and what other resources like the legislature can we count
on? There's still a couple of grants we can apply for. We didn't get some of the ones we wanted. And we'll be putting out another newsletter in the next couple of weeks. And our end of the year newsletter often gets good results. So that's what we have going so far.
That is great. I guess this is a question, maybe Rob, more directed for you on a legal side. Is SPRAB able, as a citizen advisory board, to send any kind of commentary to the legislature, or support a bill or make a statement or anything like that if it's relevant to the parks? Or does that kind of run afoul of any laws in terms of our charter versus state lobbying?
Yeah, I believe that's okay, as long as that's, of course, it's letters prepared and discussion under public meeting laws.
Yeah.
I could follow up with the attorney. Also our staff member who chairs our city liaison committee, or excuse me, our city legislative committee, excuse me, and just to make sure that there would be no issue. And I could follow up with Chair McDowell afterwards on that, if that works.
I think it'd be a good idea. Carol, I'm sorry, Carol, I see you're waving your hand.
It's just that, I'm not sure how that works with what you guys do, but individuals certainly do make a difference to their legislators.
Sure.
Your particular legislator. We've got 6 here in Salem, so you need to find out which is yours, and just once we have that bill number, it would be easy to just say, please support this.
That's a great point. Please let us know when you have the bill number, and depending on, if more helpful, we can do both. We can either have people reach out, or we can consider having SPRAB write up a short little recommendation and just sending that out, just to have one more piece of notice, sharing that. I know we have some folks like Representative Anderson, who has come from the city level, that I'm sure would be responsive to that as well. So
yes.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Any other questions for Carol? All right, hearing none.
I'm just going to sit in, but I'm going to black my screen.
Okay, perfect. Do we have any further public comment? I'm not seeing anything on my end. All right, council liaison updates. Councillor Varney, how are you tonight? And what's new on the council side?
I am doing just fine, thank you. I really don't have a heck of a lot. We're going to have a really busy meeting on Monday. We're going to have 4 public hearings. And I will be in Canada, but I am hopefully going to be settled and be, getting into the meeting virtually. So the hearings, one is an annexation of property down on Sunnyside Road, but the other 3 might be of interest. One is the code amendment to comply with the state's climate-friendly and equitable communities parking lot requirements. This is something I talked about at our last SPRAB meeting, and so that's one of the public hearings. Basically, it's to require mitigation for a parking lot that's over a ½ acre in size. And there are different options, like they can put in trees so that it will achieve a 40% tree canopy within 15 years. They can put in solar power solar power generation capability, or they can put payments into the new wind and solar fund. And so, or it can be a combination of those things, but we're having a hearing on that. I just picked up my packet. I haven't reviewed any of the public comments that are coming in yet. So I don't have any information about some of the questions the public have about that, but I'm looking forward to that one. We will also have a hearing on establishing the new solid waste collection rates for the next 2 years. We typically do this every year, and one of the things we're doing is going to switch it to every 2 years instead of having to go through the rate setting process every year. I'm on the solid waste committee, which is a new committee that was formed this year. So if you have any questions about garbage, recycling, whatever, I'm the person to reach out to. I mean, if you have questions about rates, the rate setting, what is being proposed is an increase next year of 5.35% in Marion County and 5.61% in Polk County. And that equates to, let's say if you have a 35-gallon can, the rate would be increased $1.65 in Polk County, and in Marion County, $1.85 per month. Okay. And then the rate increases for the following year are less. They're 3.35 and 3.79% for Marion and Polk respectively. And the reason that they're less is because this coming year, they're trying to make up for a lot of the increased costs of this past year that popped up because of inflation. The committee, we have 6 haulers, garbage haulers, and they send us basically what their estimated expenses are going to be for the year. And then what we do is we set a rate so that they get between 8 and 12% over what their expenses and et cetera were. So that's how we do the rate setting process. We try to keep it around 10% if possible, but want to keep it between that 8 and 12. So are there any questions on that? Okay. The last.
Wait,
oh,
real quick,
I'm sorry.
Al Holland raised his hand.
What's the
Okay.
advantage? What's the advantage or trade-off to having 6 different haulers? And is that ever going to be consolidated, or what's the reasoning for 6 different haulers?
Well, they have had those franchises, I want to say since the beginning of time. I asked Ryan Zink that this afternoon because I was meeting with him about the every other week rates and how we can incentivize people to downsize, create less garbage, etc. And I specifically asked him about, how did I refer it? How were those TERFs developed and how does that work? So to answer your question, I'm just trying to think of how best to answer it. He showed us the bigger map, and the areas that each hauler has actually go out into the county as well. And then they're already preset, and they've been that way for a long time. In terms of consolidation into one, many of these are family-owned businesses that get passed down to a family member to take over. The only one that's not like that is Republic, which is national. And Republic actually bought out one of the hauler franchise areas fairly recently. And so they have 2 of them. So it went from 7 down to 6. Does that make sense? And they all are subject to the rates that we set. So we have that increase for haulers for folks that live in Marion County, and we have the increase for the haulers that service the folks in Polk County. Yeah.
I see Debbie has her hand up.
Yeah, I had a question about next year. I think next summer, 2020, not this coming summer, but 2025, they're supposed to start that Plastics Pollution and Recycling Modernization Act, where they're going to revamp the recycling process. And I just wondered if there's any talk about that and how that is going to affect rates, or if they're starting to plan for that.
We had a presentation on it way back in, oh boy, I want to say July. Maybe at the very beginning, just kind of an informational one about what was coming up. And we are going to jump more into discussions about it January, February. So it's on our radar, and we will be talking about that as a committee. That's one of the reasons this solid waste committee was formed, because there are things like this that pop up that needed a committee rather than trying to get a hold of individual counselors, for example.
Very helpful. Thank you for all that.
Okay. Yeah, the fourth public hearing is on, it's a continued public hearing on our proposed amendments to our sign code, which is a huge document. And when I say sign code, so it covers yard signs, billboards, those balloon things you see that wave around. It covers a lot of different things. One of the things of interest to me is the digital signs that we're seeing pop up. And part of this sign code is going to limit the amount of illumination those signs can put out. For example, it will prohibit visible light within 100 feet of a residential area, for example, and limit light that's going up. And so that might be of interest to folks. I know there are a lot of businesses, obviously, that are interested in it. So that will be interesting public testimony as well. And that's all I have, unless anyone has questions about anything else.
I think one that I'll just kind of put out there is given the polling or the ballot results in the recent election and the payroll tax. I know council is going to be having a lot of conversations about that in terms of what happens next. And I guess I think I would just offer up, if we as SPRAB can be helpful in any way, or if there's ways for us to be part of that conversation, especially since a lot of the proposed cuts had to do with certain things like everything from splash pads to bathrooms, obviously stopping new hiring of things like park rangers. It seems like, if there's ways that we can support you in the liaison role to keep some of the interests of parks in mind, let us know.
Yeah, I appreciate that a lot. Just reach out to me. I'll stay in contact with you, obviously, and let you know what's going on with the work sessions and discussions. So follow along. I really don't know exactly, obviously, what that's going to look like, how we're going to develop a revenue task force, who's going to be on that task force, for example. There are a lot of things that we'll be working on. Is there anything you'd like me to bring forward tomorrow with my counselor comments or anything?
I think we had that letter from last month just outlining why parks are essential. I think those are kind of represent the core ideas that we have here. And I think at least I can take a guess that I think the general consensus here is that we recognize it's a tough situation and just want to emphasize that the most we can really keep some of these services that serve the full community in place, the better. And we stand ready to help as much as we can, as we're trying to be more involved. And I don't know what exactly that looks like you said, trying to figure out what those task forces are, et cetera. But just noting that as a board, I think a lot of us would be interested in being part of that conversation as much as possible.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that, all of you.
All right. Any other questions for Councillor Varney before we move on? All right. Well, thank you so much. Appreciate your time and enjoy your trip up to Canada.
I will. The Pacific Salmon Commission stuff is really enjoyable because of our bilateral treaty with Canada. So meeting with Canada and Alaska, and it's really interesting. So thank you. I'll give you a wrap up next week.
Look forward to it.
Okay.
Take care.
Okay, thanks. I'll be hanging out on the side if there are more questions.
Perfect. All right, let's move into our board items and presentations. First, we're going to hear bond-funded park paths and trails rehab and replacement from Aaron. Aaron, I see you're on the screen, so take it away.
Great. Yeah, I'm here. Can you guys hear me okay?
It's coming through loud and clear.
All right, perfect. I don't have a lot of experience with the Zoom meetings, seems like lately, so want to make sure I can do all this. Thank you for having me here, folks. My name is Aaron Kimsey. I am acting assistant city engineer in the public works department. Been a project manager for a long time and I've had the joy of working on a lot of different parks projects over the years, so it's a pleasure to be here. Before I get into my presentation, I kind of wanted to give you guys a little bit of a background on the bond that was passed by the voters. As you may recall, it was a very large $300 million bond that covered multiple categories, transportation being one, seismic retrofit to the Civic Center, parks included a chunk of money, which is why I'm here tonight, and then some other types of projects, some IT things, and some fire station equipment and such. And so with the bond, there were projects identified, and Parks, Paths, and Trails was one of those projects that was in the bond measure. And with it, we essentially have a bucket of money, I'll call it, for just kind of simplification. And so we don't really have, unlike a transportation project where we say we're going to go improve X street, with the Parks, Paths, and Trails, we've only said we have set funding amount for parks and paths, or parks, paths, and trails around the city. And so as part of this process now, we need to go in and look at how do we prioritize which paths and trails are in need of improvement. How do we select different parks around the city, and then ultimately create estimates for those projects, and then create a project to be constructed over the next 10 years, or the life of the bond. So without further ado, I will jump in. Hopefully I can share my screen without any issues. Okay, I'm gonna do this. I didn't do it. There we go. Okay, and this is very casual, so if you guys have questions along the way, definitely just kind of raise your hand. I can see most of you. So what you see on the screen right now is we've had a similar process to what we're going through on Parks, Paths, and Trails. A similar process took place for sidewalk infill around town and replacement. And so we went through a process, the same deal. We have a bucket of money that we want to use to improve sidewalks around town. But now we have to figure out, okay, where do we do those improvements, and how do we prioritize who gets the money first before the funds run out? And so the transportation group that worked on the sidewalk project came up with this criteria for sidewalk replacement. And so they're looking at each sidewalk around town and giving it a score, and how it relates to these different criteria. So there was an equity category that was weighted 25%, and there was a street classification category that, okay, this is a major arterial, so it's going to get so many points, and it's going to be worth 6% of the total score. How close is the sidewalk to schools? What's the proximity to transit? And so the list goes on. And then obviously hazard assessment was a fairly large category that we wanted to weigh against. Obviously, if it's a tripping hazard, or it's a sidewalk's just a really bad repair, then that would get a certain score and then get weighted. And we would go through the list and score those sidewalks, get a prioritization, and then go do that. So what you're seeing on the screen right now is the approved criteria and weight that council has seen and adopted for sidewalk replacement. So we decided to take this same idea and apply it to parks, paths, and trails.
Aaron, real quick, if I can ask one question.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
back to the other slide. Why are two of the categories blank? Why distance to nearest crossing and pedestrian crashes?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So that's a good question. So the sidewalk program had, and I probably should have just taken those off on this. I copy and pasted what they used. They had sidewalk replacement. They had sidewalk infill, so where there's no sidewalk, And there was a third category, and it's slipping me right now. And so some of the other sidewalk categories would have had criteria for distance to nearest crossing or pedestrian crashes.
That makes sense.
But the replacement program didn't consider those as criteria. If that
Gotcha.
makes
Thank
sense.
you. Yep.
Yeah. And so again, before I get, you guys are covering up part of my slides, so I'm gonna make you disappear. Okay, here we go. Along with the criteria we were looking at, there was also kind of a process. So we've kind of decided, okay, with the parks, we have we have a database, I'll say, for all of the paths and trails in the city of Salem parks, and we kind of have a rating for them based on their hazard assessment. How many cracks do they have? How many is the sidewalks or asphalt spalling? Are there a lot of cracks? So these are upheaving areas where we have some root damage. So we have that database, and so the process that we're looking at is first to share those locations, and then once we develop our criteria that you see on the right, we'll evaluate those locations against the criteria. And then begin to identify that top ranking or that priority. Once we have the priority, we'll develop a cost estimate for each path or trail, and package them into a good project level or size where it's going to make sense for a contractor to want to bid the work. And then the bond we have a bond oversight committee that meets monthly, and it's consistent of the mayor and a couple counselors. I think Varney actually might be on that committee. And as well as I believe there's one or two kind of at-large members. And so we meet with them monthly to talk about the entire bond program. But we also go to them for this type of decision making to say, hey, we're not to get them informed so that when we go to council, we have some counselors and the mayor that have already kind of heard this, they have a background for it, and then they can help us through the council meeting. So anyway, once we develop the criteria and the locations, we develop some estimates, and then the bonds oversight committee would help us develop recommendations for where those projects would be built. And then once we have all that figured out, we would seek public input. So we would go to some of the neighborhoods, some of the folks that are close to in proximity to those parks, and let them know, hey, these are the projects or the areas that we think would benefit from this. And ultimately we would go to council, and then they would give it a stamp of approval for actually going out and then designing and constructing these projects. So on the right-hand side of this screen is the criteria that we've taken the previous slide and we've adopted it and modified it to fit parks, paths, and trails. And really what we wanted to come to you guys tonight. We don't know yet what the weights should be. We're going to that's the next step in our process. And we're not even sure if all of these criteria are going to make the final cut. So this is more of a brainstorming criteria list. Like, these are some things that we think might be good to think about when we're talking about parks, paths, and trails, and kind of figuring out the prioritization for parks. And so really, I think tonight we kind of wanted to bring this list to you guys. We've already shared this with the Bond Oversight Committee. They've provided some input, but they really wanted us to come to you guys tonight to also get your input and see, just make sure we're all on the same page, or are we missing criteria that we think is really important? So essentially, I'll just kind of go through description of each of these. So there's a need-based equity, which is kind of that existing equity tool that we've used for sidewalks and other transportation projects. Park classification and function. So that's similar to the street cost classification. So is it a larger park? Is it a smaller park? How does it function? We felt like that wouldn't be a good criteria to consider. Park utilization, how many folks are coming to that park? How is it being used and utilized? Connection to existing transportation systems. This is kind of like our folks. I think there's a couple ways we could look at this. You could look at this as are there transportation routes that go through a park that would help create connectivity to different parts of town, or are there, is there a transit stop nearby that someone would want to get access to the park and then use the park? So I think there's multiple ways to kind of consider that. Revenue generation, larger parks like Riverfront Park and Minto Island Brown Park, like things like the triathlon or the Ironman that come. Do we want to consider how much those parks bring revenue not only to the park and to the city, but just to the businesses in general? Accessibility and ADA, that's obviously something that's very important. Kind of fits under the hazard assessment, but it takes it to the next level and really saying, okay, do we have existing paths that create that accessibility that we need? Relationship to other projects is essentially saying, okay, we've got, for example, in our parks, we have some playgrounds that are getting improved. We have some sports fields that are getting improved with the bond. And so it's saying, okay, we're already going to be in this park to make a new field or to create a new playground or a new sports court. And we know we have some poor sidewalk or not sidewalk paths and trails in the same park. It seems like it would make a lot of sense to use some of the funding for those efforts, since we're kind of already there and you can get a good economy of scale. You've got a contractor on site that can do the work, and so that is a criteria that I think would be good in considering how we're utilizing the funds. So that's a lot. And I guess I would just take maybe questions on this first slide here. Does any of the criteria really kind of resound with you individually? Are there things where you're like, that doesn't really make a lot of sense? Or I guess I'd be willing to take feedback. And like I said, what we hope to do is kind of scale this down to get a really good core list of criteria, and then we'll go back to the group and then start to kind of figure out what percentage they should be.
Aaron, can I just ask 2 quick clarification questions for you?
Yes.
One is with the funding bucket that you're talking about, paths and trails. Is it specifically within park limits? Does it include things around parks? One of the reasons I'm thinking about is you talked about connecting to existing transportation systems, and sometimes that might be a path that is not technically part of the park or a connector. So just curious where that jurisdiction begins or ends.
Yeah, so these were really considered, the effort was really focused on improving paths and trails within the park. A lot of the parks have side street sidewalks, but that's really kind of deemed to that other bucket of money that the bond has for sidewalk replacement. And the other thing I wanted to clarify too is it's really geared towards rehabbing or improving existing paths and trails. So, I mean, there might be a great idea to build a new path somewhere, but this is really focused on fixing what we already have.
That's good. Okay, that's clear. That's good clarification. And just when I see Allie, your hands up. My other question is relationship to other projects. You mentioned like other development or building projects like playground replacements, etc. Is there like a linkage to other things like climate action plan or Salem, thinking about like some of those metrics that have been built in and trying to figure out? I know those are slightly different, but just trying to think about, as the city's doing big projects, big investments, thinking about the holistic approach. Have those been considered as kind of part of that?
I'm going to say no. I don't think so. At least from my perspective, I wasn't considering that. I was really more thinking about just economy of scale. We're already here. And we see we have a path that needs to be corrected. That would be advantageous to kind of tackle that at that time.
That makes sense. I see Al's hand is up.
I'm interested in knowing when and how you're going to get the locations that you're going to be considering for classifying all these things. In particular, in some of the sidewalks and park streets and paths paved, there have been markings placed on hazardous spots on the trails as they are, where roots have protruded or potholes have emerged or something. Those white marking paintings that are supposed to mitigate some people's slipping because they can see them better.
Right.
Have those marked spots been recorded so that they can come back to and be revisited for actual maintenance and improvement now?
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure who is making those markings, but I do know that city park staff did a boots on the ground walk of I don't know if it was the entire system, but it was a very, very large area, and there might be some other parks folks on this call that could chime in. But I know that we did a boots on the ground. Like I said, we took a lot of photos. We actually mapped it in our database, and so we have all this stuff documented. And I'm assuming those markings that you're seeing are from those walks, but I'm not 100% sure.
So they're not. It's not being coordinated between you two, apparently. So what I'm wanting to know is, I know that there are some pretty serious hazards that have been marked. I want to know if they need to be brought to your attention so that, or if they will already have been brought to your attention.
Yes. So I have a database list that, like I said, has all of the parks, all the hard path trails, so concrete and asphalt. That's documented and it's scored. So we have a list of like very poor paths, moderate paths, and then like basically, in good condition or excellent condition. So I do have that database that was created by park staff. And so that's what we're gonna, this first part of that slide where I have this first bullet point. That's really taking, okay, we already have a database for what is poor or very poor in our system. And so that's going to kind of be the focus. Like we'll start to rate those once we get a criteria finalized. We'll rate those and see how they score, and then we'll try to improve as many as we can with the funding that we have. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I think we are working together as far as getting that information logged so that then we know where the trouble spots are.
Okay.
Debbie.
Yeah, I just think that it seems like the park utilization, I think, should have a heavier weight, because that also with the hazard assessment, it multiplies the hazard assessment, probably has some relationship to revenue generation as well. I think that, and there's a greater risk, and a greater benefit for considering how many people visit the park.
Okay, that's good.
Following up on that, sorry, Rick, 1 second, is with the equity score, I know it's the CIP, so I'm trying to remember, does that deal with distributions of parks across the city, or can you remind us kind of what's factored in under the paths and trails in that 25% equity rating?
Yeah, I am not well versed on this, but and Rob could probably chime in if he's willing to. I think that is a census tract basis equity score, and so we have we take the kind of the factors that are based on the census tract, which is more need based, and then we score it based on that, and so the counselors or the council has kind of said pretty loudly that they want a consistent scoring method for equity across all categories, transportation, parks, etc. so that it's consistently scored and looked at. And then they've also said they want it to be weighed consistently across all categories of infrastructure. So the 25% has been deemed the rate that we're gonna weigh the equity, but it's based on census tracts, so it's really kind of that. And I'm not sure kind of what goes into all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll just jump in real briefly. Aaron did a great job describing it, but it's a tool. It has no relationship to the conditions of the parks. It's entirely based on data that we received from the Census Bureau through the American Community Survey. So it's looking at demographic information as well as some. I think there might be a little bit of in there that kind of tips out environmental information about the broader community that's being served. So think about income levels. I think there's racial makeups in there. There's also information about how many people have disabilities and that prevent them from being drivers, for example. So we could provide a more detailed explanation of the tool at a future point, but it has just something that has no direct relationship to what's actually in the park or the park services being provided.
That makes sense. I think the reason I was asking is, to Debbie's point, my initial thought would be, similarly, we should start by really prioritizing parks that are used very heavily. Things, like I think what Al is referencing is some of the paths at Minto where there's like a corner and you have some striping on the road or in the path, and it's kind of a hazard. I think the flip side of that, kind of going to the equity concern, is if you're only improving the parks that are already busy, then you're not maybe improving the ones that could be busier if you were to improve them. Does that make sense? Like, kind of, if you build it, they will come approach. And so making sure, it seems like thinking something about geographic spread. Are we thinking about wards in East Salem that maybe are not getting the investment? And so trying to figure out some kind of geographic factor seems important if it's not already baked in. I imagine it would show up in the equity tool in that sense, but it seems like there should be some consideration of not only putting it into the already well-maintained, maybe already going to have some improvement parks, but really trying to think about spreading it across the city in different areas.
Mm-hmm.
I think Rick had his hand up, and then I saw Al's hand go up after that, or Alan's hand, sorry.
Yeah. First of all, I'm looking at this criteria, and the need-based equity is very important at 25. Hazard assessment is incredibly important at 45. That's 70% right there.
Yeah.
So like the sidewalk one, you're probably, for the rest of them, you're probably looking at 8 and 6%, which
right.
Some of them, to me are quite important. The accessibility ADA, I think has, and the hazard assessment are can be almost combined.
Yeah.
But good luck. If I had something very important and only got 6%, I wouldn't be really happy about it. But so yeah. But I understand, hazard assessment and need-based equity are very important. Are you sure you can't go over 100%? So I just a thought.
Yeah. I think if we decided that there was another criteria that we felt like wasn't being represented well enough with the weight, we could reduce the hazard assessment potentially. As I said, the equity is kind of a fixed number. That's why I have question marks on everything else. 45% was what was agreed to for the sidewalk projects. And yeah, so I mean, I think that's up for negotiation for sure. But I think at the end of the day, we want to make sure that those paths that are just really poor condition are getting addressed.
Alan Alexander.
Oh, thank you so much. And listen, could you refresh my memory? How much money are we talking about that's in this pot for trails and paths?
I knew you were going to ask that, and I think it's 4 million. Rob, do you know if that number is accurate? I didn't look it up before this meeting. I apologize.
Well, unfortunately,
I will also have to look it up. It is approximately 4 million, I believe, but I would have to verify that.
Yeah.
Well, tragically, that doesn't do much in the way of reconstruction. And
Right.
I'm concerned, and I'm looking through this criteria. I can certainly understand the need for equity. And I think hazard assessment and ADA accessibility, you're also looking at some liability issues too that the city's got to consider. But I'm concerned because my focus is neighborhood parks, that this criteria would pretty much eliminate most all neighborhood parks. Particularly when you look at classification, park utilization, revenue generation, those sort of things, but pretty much just, they would disappear in the priority zone. I hope that wouldn't be the case.
Yeah, no, in fact, one of the things we talked about at the bond oversight committee was, we could, let me go back to my notes. There was a discussion about, you could kind of turn some of that on its head. And so like your assumption is that we would score a larger park that gets used a lot, or the classification of the park, that it would get a higher score. But you could turn that on its head and say, we really want to make sure that these neighborhood parks get the love and attention that they desperately need, because they can kind of get forgotten about. And so we could make the scoring criteria such that, those smaller parks that don't see the revenue as regularly, that they score higher. We could certainly do that. Again, it's only going to be a 6 or 8% score, so it wouldn't really sway them. But if they have a large hazard issue, and they're in a neighborhood that does need-based equity, then they would make the list, I think.
Well, I appreciate that, of course, but we also recognize the need that, to get the greatest good for the greatest number. But I would just hate for the neighborhood parks to just, to be out of consideration for some of this.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's part of the reason why the Bond Oversight Committee wants to be involved in the recommendations that go to council ultimately for approval. And council obviously would also be kind of considering that. At the end of the day, they're going to want to make sure that, we are with this, we don't get a lot of park bond money. I mean, let's face it, I don't know how long it's been since the parks received bond money. It hasn't been in my lifetime at the city of Salem. So being able to take advantage of that and use those funds in parks that don't, or parts of town or parks that don't often see that funding.
Will this-
Oh, go ahead, Al.
Will this kind of maintenance and construction include simply maintaining or improving some hazards on existing trails? For example, grinding off root eruptions and things like that?
Yeah, so if the park makes the list, if it's scored and then it makes the list, and then the thought is, okay, we're going to go there, we're going to go to that park now, we're going to make these improvements. We would improve it. We would either fully remove what's there and replace it with new. I don't really think, I'm not envisioning where we would do a lot of like grinding and trying to make what's there work. I feel like it's really about removing the problem. It could have a poor base. There could be some poor drainage issues. It just could be really old, old sidewalk that's been there it's beyond its life. So I really feel like it's going to be more of a remove and replace. And in areas where we have trees that are creating root damage, then we would look at, are there alternate ways to construct the path so that it's more accommodating we don't want to go down and cut a bunch of trees down to build these walks. So, is there path realignment potentially, or are there alternative construction methods that would help us kind of coexist with the tree roots? That makes sense.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So Aaron, if I could just, I guess, share a couple specific suggestions then on this. Just everything based on what we've heard tonight, my own thoughts. I would say, I think to Debbie's point, revenue generation to me feels like it should fall under park utilization. It seems like the revenue aspect is, I think also to Alan's point, is very heavily driven by Minto and Riverfront. And so you heard talking about in Bush, I guess. There's a few other exceptions, but that is like park utilization is going to capture that, I think. And it also then, otherwise you're running the risk of having two that might discourage neighborhood parks from being included.
Yeah.
My other two thoughts, one is I feel like the accessibility ADA, you mentioned that kind of fits under hazard. To me, that is much more of a legal question. And like we need, as a city, need to make sure we're providing ADA accessibility. And that's oftentimes a part of projects. And so for me, it feels like that should be part of the 45% we're looking at of, are there hazards where users that are using wheelchairs, et cetera, cannot actually access our parks. And so because I think Rick's point is well made, that if you take these remaining buckets and try and divide the remaining couple percentages out there, you're going to have 3, 4, 5, 6%.
Right.
So to me, that fits under that and should be part of a very intentional, like making sure we're meeting our ADA accessibility requirements as a city.
Okay.
And then my final thought is, I really like that the connection to existing transportation systems is included here. I think correct me if I'm wrong, if anyone else remembers, but I'm pretty sure it's Gear Park. I'm getting my master plans confused here, where there was the back and forth with council about the additional parking spaces. And one of the things that came up multiple times in there was that there was a transit stop, but how far away it was. And I think that kind of question is going to come up more and more. And I was on the climate action plan subcommittee or process, the committee, and transportation continues to be our biggest source of carbon emissions. That's why I was asking about relationship to other projects. And so as we're thinking about that, I think the more we can think about how our parks integrate into other ways of using our system, into our park system, so transportation options, bike, pedestrian paths, etc. I think that's a really important aspect. And we did a walk to the park for the 10-minute walk campaign, and Rob, Councilor Varney, others were there. And, there was kids that were at that park that were like, I'd never been here before. And I think, that one has a lot of good access points, but it's still a good reminder that you can have the best park in the world, but if you don't have easy ways for people to get there outside of just driving, that can be hard. And then once again, going back to the neighborhood park or smaller parks that don't maybe have parking built in, transit systems nearby, and trying to make sure that's accessible, I think is important.
Okay. Yeah, so I think what I'll do is I'll take this feedback and also take what I've heard from the Bond Oversight Committee. And just so you know, they that group was also, they had kind of earmarked the utilization as something that was important to them. They like the idea of relationship to other projects, just in the sense that if we can get better bang for our buck, then that's a good idea. And accessibility, which they also kind of felt like was really close related to that hazard assessment issue. So I feel like I'm hearing some very similar comments from both the Oversight Committee and from you guys. So our goal then would be able to take what we've heard, consolidate it, shorten this list down a little bit. We have a Bond Oversight Committee meeting at the end of this month, November. Really try to get some kind of final direction from them, and then I can always come back to this group once we kind of get this more drilled down and we get these percentages figured out. I can talk with Robin when we have that figured out. I can come back and give you guys an update on where we are.
That would be wonderful. I really appreciate that, Aaron.
I did have another slide, but I think it's not related to this. Oh, yeah, I'll just share this real quick. This was that pavement condition assessment that I was talking about that we have. And so I think this is where, I forget which gentleman it was, but where they're seeing white paint kind of painted across a lot of paths and trails around town. It's kind of hard to read, but essentially, oops, too far. Trying to get out of the way here. Okay. So we're looking at things like the texture of it, the structure, the cracks, how big are the cracks, what's the quantity of the cracks, is there ponding water? And so, there's the list. A lot of very, very poor, but even more just poor. And so the hope is that we would be able to tackle as many of these on this list as possible, especially in that poor to very poor range. And some of these, there are some big parks at the top of the list, like, but there are also plenty of neighborhood parks and other parks, smaller parks that are not too far from being very poor. So, they're just a few points away from the total there. So, anyway, I probably should have shared that earlier, just so you had some visual aid of kind of what we've been tracking for all the parks around town.
That's really helpful, Aaron. Thank you so
Okay.
much. Does anyone else have any final questions for Aaron? Anything else, Aaron, on your mind, or?
No, nothing here. So I saw some comments. Or any of these comments? Oh, here we go. So the total fund bucket for this project is a little over 4 million. So it's 4,061,000. And oh yeah, Varney can confirm that she's part of the infrastructure bond steering committee. And okay, yeah, great. That's all I have. So I'll come back to you guys in a few months, maybe with an update, and then kind of go from there.
That sounds wonderful. Thank you so
Excellent.
much. Appreciate your time.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, guys.
All
Thanks
right.
for sharing.
Next on our agenda is the heritage tree designations, but I noticed we do not have Mylan with us tonight. So Rob, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, thanks everyone. I'm just going to give a quick update on this item, and unfortunately, I think it's going to need to come back at a later meeting. We had a little compressed timeline with this item that was an important step wasn't accomplished earlier this week, and I'll provide a little bit more context about what I'm talking about with sharing my screen here briefly. So if you can see my screen, this is, oh, no, you can't, not quite, hold on. Here we have an image of Bush's Pasture Park, and outlined in black here is what we refer to as the Lower Oak Grove. The area in green here is the area that the city forestry group and Mylan are proposing to designate as a heritage tree grove. It's an area of Oregon white oaks. So I'm going to unshare my screen so you can all see my face a little bit. But it's an area of Oregon white oaks that we believe that their genetics date back from the last ice age. And so they are very kind of genuine specimens in really good health that represent the cultural uses of the Kalapuya people. And so this is an opportunity to really recognize the importance of the oak trees to the Kalapuya people, who are now represented by the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde and some of the other tribes the city has relationships with. Because of the nature of that we're trying to honor this important legacy with the tribes, we want to have a discussion with the tribes about this kind of more comprehensively before we formally bring it to SPRAD for endorsement. And unfortunately, that meeting earlier this week had to be canceled because we had a key staff member had to go out on bereavement leave at a death in their family. So unfortunately, we just have to postpone that discussion, and this is going to have to come back to SPRAD at a later time. But I think staff is certainly very excited about this. This is heritage tree nomination hasn't transpired in some time, and I don't think there's a more appropriate next candidate than something like this.
Concurrent with the consideration of the white oak, that property also includes an extensive area of camas growth. The camas was harvested in that area, so that should be considered, I think, as part of the historical interest for that site.
Absolutely. That is, I think we absolutely agree with you. And I think Mylan will get in a little bit more in depth with that when he partly presents this to you. With the designation that we're proposing, staff proposes to work with Willamette University, the tribes, and other partners to create specific management actions and plans for that area to manage both the oaks and the camas. That is kind of our target. Both those are our target species for management there.
Thank you. It's important to do this. Glad to hear it.
Rob, one question. Is there a plan to have like additional signage or anything with the designation in this case that would kind of tell part of that story?
You know, that now we're getting into some specifics that I think I'm going to defer to Mylan, but just to come up with stuff right off the top of my head, I think that would be a perfect item to discuss in the management plan. That would kind of be the next step after the designation.
Gotcha. All right. Well, we will wait to hear more and see that move forward. Let me pull up this. Are you on the next one too? I think
Yes.
You, Rob. So we'll take it over for the Parks for All plan.
Wonderful, thank you. I'm very excited for this next presentation. This is something an area of personal passion for me, as this update to our park system plan. And I want to talk a little bit about kind of the significance of it. So this is the plan that it's a component of the city's land use comprehensive plan. It is considered a support document, but it is actually an extension of the plan. So it's a big deal. Updating this document is updating basically the city's vision for how it wants to grow in the future. Of course, our focus here is on parks and recreation. With that, I'm going to run through some slides. I hope it won't take too long, and then I want to have some discussion with the board. That's kind of the agenda for tonight. And I'm going to keep things relatively high level for the project tonight. My intention is just to give a kind of a high level introduction to what the update plan, the process to update the plan will be focused on. Okay, the project is tentatively called Parks for All, and it is a project to update the park system plan, as I just mentioned. I'm going to talk a little bit more about why it's called Parks for All on the next slide here. Why are we doing this? So first, why are we doing this? Salem does have some incredibly beautiful and amazing parks. I think Bush's Pasture Park is one of them. Riverfront is another one. I personally very much enjoy Minto Brown Park. However, we certainly have a perception in our community that we have disinvestment in some areas of our community in terms of parks. And that's another phrase you put, because we have an inequitable park system. We don't really have good information truth through data at the city to know 100% accuracy if that's true. But certainly I share that perception. Just working here at the city, I have a perception that we do not equitably provide park services to all residents. And I think some of the reasons for that is a historic lack of funding tools in our park system, as well as including kind of a very limited amount of operating funds for our park system over a very long period of time, as well as just the same kind of struggles that all cities have about equity have led us here. But I do believe today we have a very inequitable park system, and I'm not the only one. And so that's the focus. We're really focusing on equity. So a lot of my presentation tonight is going to be talking really specifically about what I mean when I say we're focusing on equity. And I think I already touched on this, but why now? We're doing it because this is an important implementation step following the adoption of the new comprehensive plan that was the result of the Salem process, and that occurred in 2022. So the term equity is actually defined in the new comp plan as well as in the climate action plan. It's quite a long definition, and I will share it with the board at a later time. Actually, once I'm done presenting my screen, I'll share it in the chat.
Wait, Rob, we can't see your screen right now.
I apologize. Okay, let's start this over. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, intro to the park system plan. So why are we doing this? We're doing it because we have a really inequitable park system. So I'm going to catch up here and the Salem project. So here is a concise definition of equity that I find very useful. But as I was saying before, it is not the official city definition of equity. The city's official definition is quite meaty. It's too long to put on a slide. So for now, I'm going to go with this one. The term refers to fairness or justice of a situation or distribution. So in this case, the distribution is the distribution of park services. And I think as important, if not more important, is the situation. And that's through this planning process, we have an opportunity to engage people in our community and seek input from from segments that we have not heard from before, either because they don't have the capacity to come to us, so we need to go to them, or for other factors. So I think this is both an opportunity to really have equity in process and equity in outcome. This is a graphic that some of you may have seen before. It's from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. Up top there, it shows some individuals using the same bicycle, but it doesn't meet their needs equally, and it's labeled equality. Below is a similar image, but everyone has been given a bike to meet their specific need, and that one's labeled equity. I think this is a really helpful graphic. However, I very much disagree with the labels. I think this is both two forms of equity, and it's also two forms of equality. I think the top is input equality, and I think the bottom is output equality. So they're kind of really similar concepts of equality. I'm going to get really geeky with some park planning stuff on this next slide here. This is a taxonomy of equity theory models. And it's not something I created. This is actually something that was published in a paper that in 2001. And the paper was a case study looking at how to use GIS tools to create a more equitable park system. So this is something that I found useful, and hopefully in just talking about tonight, you might find it useful as well. I'm dive a little bit deeper into it. So at the top there, the first bracket, equality, that's similar to that graphic I had up a moment ago, with the two versions, the equal inputs and the equal benefits. I want to take a moment just to highlight that equal inputs will never equal equal benefits. So if you give everybody the same thing, they're not going to reap the same benefits from it. It's just our world doesn't work that way. So I think that's an important thing to denote. But that green bracket around that whole notion of equality means it's part of what I mean by equity when I talk about it in this project. The other kind of equity that the other kind of notion of equity that I am referring to in this project is this idea of need-based equity that Aaron talked about a little bit. And this is about prioritizing resources to those who are most vulnerable in our community, the socioeconomically disadvantaged. So in a sense, it is equity through inequity, because it's about taking resources from those who have a lot and giving it to those who have less. There are some other notions of equity that are out there in the world. I think it's really important to acknowledge those as well. This next one down here on the list is demand. We do see this in our park system and how we operate every day. I will not refer to demand as a form of equity, but I will call it by its name. I think those are demand-based criteria or theories. And one of those is demonstrated use. So kind of what we were talking about before, the most key parks to maintain are the ones that are used the most. That would be, that is a form of equity. There's also this idea that whoever, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So whoever's the loudest voice, this has a lot to do with political movement over time. This is a common form of equity is whoever's the loudest, they get their needs met first. So those are important factors. I'm not saying we're going to discredit those, but they're not generally what I'm referring to as equity. The last form up here, market equity, this has less to do with our park system because we're a public agency, but I will say it is in there in some ways. And I'll give a little bit of example. We charge fees for reservable facilities. So by doing that, we're tiptoeing into this world of market equality. That's all I'm going to say about it for now. So thinking about these different ways of equity and kind of the way I've kind of defined our focus, both on providing equal inputs, but at the same time, making sure we have some kind of equal benefits, but also that we're prioritizing those who need it the most. So those are the kind of the three competing theories of equity we have. I want to talk about how we're going to apply those a little bit. One way I'm looking to apply that through this project is through a new way to frame how we look at level of service. Today, we look at it in a kind of a hodgepodge way. And this slide up here, all I'm trying to show is that we're going to do a very comprehensive deep dive. This is a lot to take in, so I'm just going to give some really simple examples focusing on that center of the table where it talks about development of a new park facility, for example. We're going to be concerned about equity and quality, making sure that everyone, let's just say it's playgrounds, that the condition of those playgrounds, we're going to consider the condition. What's the condition of playgrounds in our park system? We're also going to consider function. Function could include, but not limited to, accessibility features. So how accessible, usable is that playground to people with different needs? Lastly, there's this idea of capacity and utilization. How easy is it to get to that playground from where people live in city? Or do we have playgrounds in enough places that everyone has a 10-minute walk they can get to a playground, for example? So those are just a high level, that's an example. And all I want to show on this slide is that we're going to take a really comprehensive look through creating a new framework for considering level of service, where we're going to leave no stone unturned. I'm going to dive into this idea just a little bit more about where we are now and where I hope to take us. So thinking about that idea of utilization of our park amenities. Currently, our park system plan has some proposed level of service standards. And on this slide, I'm going to highlight two here. We have group picnic areas that we should provide one for every 10,000 residents. And also dog parks. We should provide one dog park for every 25,000 residents. I think this is helpful. That's a really good starting place, but it's also not ideal. As a park planner, it's really difficult for me to sit down and say, well, where do we really need another dog park in the community? It's really difficult for this to be a helpful tool for that. What is helpful is if we can take it a little bit, take it and give it a spatial element to it. Think more about who's being served in terms of distance to travel. So this is an example of the level of service methodology from Portland. And I want to highlight here that both off-leash dog areas and group picnic areas, their level of service standard is to provide one for every resident within 2 miles of their house. That is really helpful for me as a park planner. I can plan facilities to ensure that everyone in our community would have, for example, a dog park and a group picnic area within 2 miles of their house. So that's the kind of transformative system that I'm hoping to get out of this project. I also talked about the function of our facilities. And so up here I have just a photo to illustrate what I'm talking about in a little more detail. This could easily be a trail or some other park facility, but I choose a playground. And ironically, this is a playground in Salem, but it's not a part of the Salem Park system. This is the Let's All Play space, which is part of the Salem Health facility. It is considered an inclusive playground. So through its design and its function, it meets the needs of a broader spectrum of our residents. And I just want to highlight some of the elements that allow it to do that. It is, for one, it's fenced. It is a fenced playground, and that helps children with autism quite a lot, makes it a more usable facility for them. It also, along those lines of children with autism, it has a bright red path around it to orientate children to where to go to find the coolest thing in that playground. And that's really helpful for users as well. It also has a really accessible surface. It has this poured in place rubber fall surfacing that's very accessible. And I think the most important thing is that the coolest things in this playground, anyone can use them, no matter what your ability is, whether that's the slide or this climbing structure. All these facilities, any child, no matter what their ability is, they are able to use it. So that's what I mean about really diving into what do we mean by, not just the condition, taking it a step further and thinking about what's its function and what do we want as a community, what level of service do we want to provide. I want to talk a little bit about this idea of need-based equity a little bit as well. And in doing that, I want to highlight that there's a strong connection here with the concept of environmental justice, especially in parks. Parks are unique in that they are environmental amenities. So you think about the environmental justice movement as a reaction to the siting of undesirable land uses close to areas, communities that are racial minorities and low income areas. This is we want to come to that and kind of flip that over and say, let's target those areas for investment, because parks are really good. Parks also come with trees. There's all sorts of environmental benefits that come with tree canopies, for example. Aaron talked a little bit about, and I did as well, that we've developed this tool. It's really meant for transportation projects, prioritizing investments in our transportation system throughout the city. Through this project, I hope that we can develop a similar tool that's really focused on parks specifically. And the example I have up here is from a recently completed study in LA County, where they created essentially a need-based equity tool that has these 4 dimensions to it. It talks about social characteristics of the population, health vulnerabilities, transportation barriers that prevent them from accessing a park, and also environmental conditions that leave the residents more vulnerable. So that this is something I hope to embrace and maybe borrow some of these ideas here for Salem. Now I want to get just a little bit into what's before us, what we're looking to accomplish here the next 2 years or so. We're proposing a 3-phase project. The first project is essentially a park needs assessment. It's going to answer the question, where does Parks and Recreation stand today? And I want to highlight that all of these phases are going to have tons of community engagement. That's a key function of all steps. So at the end of this one, we want to understand our community's dynamics and our existing park system. So the physical infrastructure, but also what is our community? What is its makeup? What is unique about Salem? Then we're going to be getting it later after that. We're getting more into where do we want to be in the future? You know, what type of new facilities do we want? What level of service do we want to provide? And we want to, through that, develop a shared community vision and identify those key projects that are going to make that vision a reality. The final phase, and I think this is also really important, is how do we get there? And that's kind of an implementation plan. The funding mechanisms, the prioritization tools to help us actually implement the plan in a successful manner. Before I leave the slide, I just want to highlight that we are proposing to accomplish phase 1 with some partnership help, but primarily with staff as the main doers of the assessment phase, where we'll reach out to some professional consultants to assist us with phase 2 and 3. Helping us steer and advise this project, we're proposing to use 3 main groups. One is going to be a project steering committee. And this is what I want to talk about a little bit more in depth with the board tonight. I'm envisioning it tentatively that it would be composed of several city councilors, several or all Sprout board members, as well as some key staff members. And this group would really, its main function would be to steer and manage the project, make sure we stay on track, that it's a successful project at the end of the day. It's also really, really important that we hear from the folks that haven't had a strong voice in the past in our park planning. And so helping us advise us on how to do that, the city is going to utilize a newly formed equity roundtable. This is a group that meets quarterly, and they represent, they're representatives of community groups that are underrepresented. So this is a new tool that we find very useful, is holding these roundtables so we can engage with them, respect their time by going to having these only 4 times a year, we have these very tightly scheduled agendas where we really get through some really important items with them and use their time wisely. And lastly, there will be a broader group of staff technical experts supporting this project on the inside and the internal side. My last slide before I open it up for questions and then hopefully some discussion, I want to highlight some partnerships that we're developing for this project that I'm very excited about. We have here it says potential partnerships, but this first one with the University of Oregon College of Design, I think is a little bit more tentative. Both of these are pretty much set in stone at this point. This winter term, the landscape architecture department is going to have a 4-unit course on spatial justice, and it's going to be entirely devoted to helping basically do a literature review, an in-depth literature review of all the technical ways that we can spatially look at park justice at the city of Salem. I'm hoping we're gonna get some really interesting ideas and tools out of that literature review. Then following that in the spring quarter, a course is going to be focused on developing a framework for condition rating of our park assets. So with that, you know, it's really important that we were talking about this a little bit earlier with the paths, but I think it's that we have a transparent system where anyone can go and log on and see how the city views its asset inventory in terms of the condition of our assets in the park system. And we need a framework of how we start getting there. And so that's what we hope those students will be helping us with as well. We're also working with the Oregon State University. Their College of Forestry has a department of ecological and social research. And among that group, there's folks there who are very interested in recreation and equality in recreation services. And there's actually several professors there that assist the state parks with surveying the whole state population about what the outdoor recreational needs of our entire state community are. And so we're kind of lashing to them and hoping they can help us deploy a statistically valid sampling a survey of our residents with a focus on reaching those communities we haven't heard from historically. And I'm really looking forward to that. We have some really talented academics who are really going to help us with that. Lastly, I'm also very excited. The city is developing this, it's a long-term project, but this idea of a enterprise-wide data strategy. So as you think about how important it is that we take bias out of what we do, and that managers have kind of data through truth, that we have data systems that also provide transparency, frankly, that there are clear tools that guide decision-making at the city. Our enterprise services department is spearheading that effort, and they can't take on the whole city, all our operations at once. That's too much. So I'm working with them, and we're going to kind of pilot this idea of developing data strategy with this project. So as we think about tools that are going to help us prioritize things, they're going to think how to build it into the city's operations. So at the end of the project, we have some really awesome tools. And I think eventually where that will end up someday is we'll have AI helping us with some of these decision makings where we take human bias completely out of the picture. And that's a little crazy and maybe a little too far out there, but we're starting in that direction when we think about developing a strong data strategy with this project. So those are the slides I have for tonight, and I think I'm going to stop there, take questions, and then I have a little bit of discussion I hope the board want to have about how you all want to be involved in this project. I see Al has his hand up. Oh, there he is.
Yes. Regarding partnerships, I'm curious, since our northern city border bounds to another town, if we are interested in partnering at all or talking at all with Kaiser, the city of Kaiser, in terms of continuing paths or interfacing, joining, or coming close to them with our park developments. Maybe they'd be interested in connecting, helping, or otherwise communicating regarding some of this stuff.
Okay, yeah, I think that's always good to collaborate with our partners. I think that's and our neighbors as well. I think that's a great idea, suggestion. I think when we get into that I think that's more of the second phase of the project. I think that's something we could definitely look into, is how can we certainly reach out and see if they're interested in kind of doing some planning with us at the same time. That would be great. Any other just technical questions, or maybe something I said was a little confusing that I could clarify before I kind of move into the next portion of my presentation here?
I guess one thing I'm wondering about, maybe this ties into the assessment, is just thinking about access to the parks. So the Portland model was really helpful to think about in terms of 2 miles to have a dog park. But I remember something that Mayor Hoy had said at one point, I think it was during the Gear Park dog park discussion, is he was saying the closest dog park to him was several miles away, and he can't take his dog on the bus, and so he has to drive there. And then this kind of got to the parking conversation. And so even if you're 2 miles from something, it's not always easy to get there. And so just I guess as we think about this, you said this kind of builds on our Salem, and there's the transportation system plan being done right now. How much integration is there holistically in some of those conversations of well, great, we have, let's say we have dog parks 2 miles from everybody and picnic shelters, but can people actually get there, or is it, blocked off or inaccessible?
Yeah, I don't have all the details worked out quite yet, but I definitely see this integration there. When we start thinking about level of service in terms of the spatial distance to travel, then it becomes really important to reduce those barriers, and create those key connections. And I think that we'll be in a better position to do that with this kind of geospatial approach. So we can have maps. We can really say, what are those barriers? Where are those underdeveloped sidewalks? What are those easy things that we could do that would dramatically increase access to some of our existing parks? I think that will come out through this process.
Makes sense.
Okay, I'm gonna move on to maybe some discussion here. So what I'm looking for as we start moving toward the launch of this project early next year is really have a discussion, allow the board to have a discussion of how you all want to be involved in this steering committee I mentioned in my presentation. I understand you are all volunteers, and you're your involvement in the board is already a lot. And I appreciate that. I also think that there's an opportunity here for the board to have a really big role in this process. And that could look like anything you want it to be. I think all of you could be members of the steering committee, or it could be a small group of you. It could be, maybe 3 to 4 of you, for example. And there could be some reporting back between what will essentially be steering committee meetings and SPRAB meetings. I'm expecting that the steering committee meetings will be every other month, and SPRAB, of course, meets monthly. So it would be a additional commitment, of at least 6 months meetings a year, and potentially up to 18 meetings through this whole process. Probably not more than that, but it could be as many as 18. So with that, I'm gonna kind of turn to listening mode, and I'm here to answer any questions, of course, as you guys might have a discussion about how you want to be involved in this project.
Rick.
Yeah, thanks, Rob, for taking this up. I think it's extraordinarily important, and something that I think is one of the things that we need to be about. And hey, I'm retired. I'd like to be part of whatever you feel that an old retired middle school choir director could be involved with. So yeah, please, and thank you for taking this up.
I can second Rick's feelings about this. I think it is important. I'd be willing to make those meetings. I think I'm really interested in being sure that Kaiser continues the bike paths along the river. That's my big deal, and they need to be aware of it. And I'd like to see whatever we can to get some of that stuff moving forward. But I think you've got some good plans and good intentions and good ideas going on there, Rob. Thanks.
Alan, I see you.
Thank you. Somebody just turned the dogs loose. I concur completely with Alan Rick's assessment. I think one of the things that I've enjoyed working with this group and meeting the folks on it, both staff and the volunteers, but I think as an advisory board, we advise very little. And I think this would be an opportunity for us to stretch our legs or spread our wings, as it were. And I think there's a lot of talent out there, and I think these could be advantageous to this committee. And I would encourage you to find uses for us to help in this process. It's a lot of work to do, and it's going to take a lot of talking and discussion. I think this group would probably be up to it, and it really would follow the mission of this group, and that's to advise to the best of our ability how the betterment of our parks. And so I would strongly support this concept.
Rob, I fully agree. I mean, I think that I'm excited about participating. I'm glad we have others as well. I am thinking about it also from a very logistical standpoint here. Like, the more people you have, the changes your quorum numbers of how many people you need if you're meeting, trying to schedule meetings. Then also just like how big the board is, does it become, or the committee, does it become unwieldy at a certain number? You mentioned that there'd be a handful of counselors and potentially some other folks. So I guess just kind of asking you the question, are those things that, you've seen as challenges in previous boards or commissions? I remember, for example, the Climate Action Plan Committee was 43 or something people, and it was unwieldy. I'll put it that way. And I to the best of the ability of not any criticism of staff or the consultants, it's a lot of people, and so I don't think we're going to get to 40, but want to be considerate of where do you hit that limit where it's productive but not overbearing of too many people trying to get too many things going on, too many cooks in the kitchen, so to speak.
Yeah, that's a really, really great question. I think we're purposely, by kind of inviting SPRAB and thinking about having several city councilors and a few city staff, I'm kind of managing the upper end of what I'm comfortable with. That's about a dozen. And I also acknowledge that if we have a quorum of SPRAB present, then we're going to have to notice every one of these meetings as a special meeting of SPRAB. That's not really too much of an issue for me, because I believe every one of these meetings should be a public meeting either way. So it's just a little bit of noticing that is the only little difference. And that's kind of, I think it really, if the whole board wants to be involved, I think that'd be great. I don't think it's going to be too much. But at the same time, I can understand that, I'm asking for a lot.
Very logistical question, just so we can pass on. I know we're missing Keith and a few others like Woody. Do you know when the meetings would be? Would they be evening meetings? Would they be during the day? Is that like, I don't know how that's usually worked with something like this.
We probably reach out and have a survey, get
Okay.
an idea of when people are available and what would work best. What kind of timing and time of the month would work best for the most number of the participants.
That makes sense. And Debbie, I saw your hand went up.
Yeah, I mean, I want to know what's going on and I want to contribute any way I can. I just don't feel like I have a lot to contribute on this. I'm not that, I don't know, it doesn't seem like a strong point for me. So if there's other people on the board that are more interested, I would like to just get updates, periodically from the committee, just to make it less unwieldy with a number of people.
Rob, do you have a sense from prior things like this, or maybe if there haven't been, like, what does the workload look like when you have one of these running? Is it, I remember like we had the subcommittee on park usage and planning, and we were reviewing other cities. We came back with recommendations. We all put some time in between meetings to help move the process along. Would you say it's going to mirror something similar to that, or is it more, staff are coming with updates and it's more of a feedback thing, similar to Aaron's presentation a few minutes ago?
Yes, I think it's more of the latter. I think it's not a tremendous homework situation where I've asked the members to do independent study. I think it's more of a staff are going to serve as the technical experts. We're going to bring ideas and recommendations to the board, and essentially we're going to be checking in with the group at each meeting, and there'll be opportunity for you to steer us in a slightly different direction than we might be thinking about going. I'm not thinking that this is going to be quite like a committee assignment SRAB may have, where it's a deep dive into a subject and you report out. And it's gonna be a little different than that. It's gonna be, we're gonna develop a scope, or we're gonna take on a schedule. We're gonna be taking some of these things kind of one chunk at a time. And as we complete the work, it will be reported to you, and you'll have an opportunity to react to it. And then that will kind of inform our next steps in the process.
That makes sense. So, I mean, I'm hearing everyone's, Debbie, I think your point's well taken, but it sounds like there's at least Al and Rick and Alan all are very interested. I'm very interested. Admittedly, I'm thinking about the timing and just having kiddos and trying to figure that out, but I would like to participate, especially at least be considered for it. I know Keith had expressed interest at one point. It might be good for us to follow up with the folks that aren't here. Joan went off my screen. Joan, I think you're still here. It just the video went off. Did you have any comments you wanted to make?
No, I agree with Debbie. That is, for my part, I don't know that I would have anything to contribute, but I would like to know what's going on.
So we may be self-selecting to a subgroup in that sense anyway, which I'm sure, Rob, like you said, you were at the upper limit already, so maybe this is helping in that sense. It does that as long as it's a majority of SPRAB, though, it doesn't change anything in terms of if it's 5 or 6 at that point, right? Okay.
That's right. As soon as we have a quorum, we're going to be, well, and again, I just don't think it's going to be too logistically challenging. We're planning to do all that anyways.
Okay. So what should we do to move forward? It sounds like we have high interest, very high engagement. I know there's a few folks like Keith and Woody, and who else am I forgetting off the top of my head that we'll want to follow up with to make sure that they can join us, or that they have the opportunity to join if they'd like to participate. Any other next steps? I know you're going to need to talk to, there's going to be a staff recommendation to council and to get others invited as well.
Yeah, I think there could be an opportunity to revisit this at the next meeting just to make sure we're still all on the same page. But I will follow up with Member Dukes and Vice Chair Norris independently. And I think some of the feedback I got tonight is going to be really helpful.
Perfect.
So, I don't think there's a whole lot more action SPRAB needs to do formally.
That sounds great. And I'll just say, I mean, I guess if participating in this, and to Debbie's point, I hope that there would be enough of an exchange of information either way that, Debbie and Joan, if you weren't a part of this task force, you would, or committee, whichever term we're using here, that you could still feel very welcome to share ideas or thoughts with all of us that would be participating, and we could bring it through. And Rob, even with staff being the technical experts, I hope that there's still a fair amount of opportunity to bring in new ideas, kind of like the 10-minute walk campaign, for example, at TPL, things like that, where there's just some of those national concepts that could be brought down that hopefully SPRAB can do, like Alan mentioned, be the advisory side in that sense. Well, wonderful. Great work, Rob. I think Parks for All is a very good way to put it. Seems like very, very good language that I think is easily digestible and understandable and really gets to the heart of what we're trying to do.
Great, thank you.
All right. Well, next we had our work plan development. Rob, I know you and I have not checked in on this. Sometimes we try and check in ahead of time with these work plans to bring forward a draft. Is there anything that you want to discuss there, or would this make sense perhaps for you, myself, and Keith to touch base in the interim and maybe put together a draft to bring forward at the next meeting?
Just looking at the time, I think that we should do the latter. I think we should definitely touch base internally, and we can bring back a recommendation at the next meeting. I'm not in, maybe I'm speaking out of my role, but I'm not anticipating a ton of changes with our work plan for next year. And we can certainly, if there are some thoughts tonight, we can definitely take those into consideration.
I think that would be my assumption as well. I'd be open to others. And so if everyone's comfortable, then Keith, Rob, and I can work together just to make a proposal to, once again, based on last year, any adjustments, and then have folks reach out. I'll just flag one thing I'd love to try and do is at least 1 or 2 in-person activities. More retreat, even if it's not a full-on retreat. I think a retreat would be great, but we did the bird walk option with the park ranger Mike last year. I thought that was wonderful. We've also in the past done the park tours where we've taken a little bus and gone to a few parks to see different properties. I think that's, now that we're getting back to those capabilities and the city's opening up some of those things, maybe we all come to the new building, check that out, which we didn't even mention, congratulations to the staff on moving to your new space. So Rob, I would just put that out there now as something that I'd love to work in, if we could try and figure that out for 1 or 2 spots in the year. Any other comments on the work plan that folks would like us to consider before we bring something back at the December meeting? All right. Well, thank you all. Rob, thank you for that presentation. I appreciate how in-depth that was too, and really helpful. And I think that's going to be a really neat role. And I think, to Alan's point, this is a chance for SPRAB to really shine and be engaged with this. So board member updates. I will share one. So Rob mentioned the partnership with University of Oregon. I had the chance to go down, what was that, Rob, a couple weeks ago now, and join Rob. And we got to see some of the models for these rapidly dismountable structures that can be going into our parks. And it's part of this project between University of Oregon and Oregon State. And the idea would be that we could have, in this case, it's a shade structure. Well, it's a structure. It's not definitively a shade structure, I should say, that will go on a concrete pad. And there's some really innovative designs. And so these students are doing some great work. One of them looks like a tree it has like a standing spot and a seating spot. Some others are different. They're really modeled after these beautiful architectural concepts from across the world. And some of them are more of a woven wooden structure. But the whole concept here is that you could put that up during part of the year, and then you would take it down and you would put it in storage so it doesn't rot during the heavy rains when it's not going to be used. But we're creating new amenities for our park system. So really neat idea. It was really cool to be able to see some of that firsthand. And that class is moving forward. I think December is when they're going to have kind of agreed upon design. And then there's going to be a trial period. I want to say January to March. Rob, you'll have to chime in here and correct any of my errors, but I want to say that it was in that winter to early spring time frame, as there was going to be a trial period to see how this looks. So you all will, I'm sure, to be able to go see this, but just in general, it's neat to be on the cutting edge of technology. And I think the one thing that stood out to me is I was talking with I think she's the head of the Sustainable Cities program. And she mentioned that this has been going on for over a decade now. And Salem is the first city to be chosen twice. So they've gone through, and it's pretty neat that we were able to get support from them for a second time around. just given the good partnership and the good work our parks team did to get us onto that docket.
Yeah, I'll just add this a little bit about the timeline of the course. It's a quarter. The class is just this fall quarter, and so those students are, I'm sure currently right now wherever they are working to combine their ideas, the group ideas, into one idea, and they're hoping to develop a prototype of that idea by actually early December, and they're going to install one of those prototypes just briefly at one of the universities. Either at Oregon State or at University of Oregon, excuse me. And then if we all feel real comfortable about the idea that was generated and there's some student interest, I think there's some potential for one of the more advanced students to take that concept a little forward in the winter and the spring, and potentially work with a structural engineer to make sure it's something that's very safe that we can put out in our park system, and then to actually fabricate the unit and have it installed this summer is a potential. I don't want to promise anything.
Perfect. Thank you. So it'll be at one of the universities. That's good to know. Perfect. Any other board member updates or any questions about that? Yes, Joan.
Well, I just wanted to say that at McCray Park, with the outreach and engagement funds that come from the city according to volunteer hours, one of the things that we did was to, am I echoing? Was to plant a pollinator garden under the sign, the McCray Park sign. And that involved two people from the city, Brian Smith and Amy Yucatan, and two adult volunteers from the neighborhood, and two elementary school aged children who helped water the plants after we dug them in. And I sent Rob pictures, and we will be adding some bulbs in this this fall.
Fantastic. Oh, I see we're getting some photos. Look at that. Well done, Joan. Thank you so much. That's a huge improvement. I really appreciate your work, and thanks for getting boots on the ground in that sense and being able to improve the park. Alan, I see your hand is up.
Yes, I just wanted to report I'm making my last visit to a neighbor association. It was delayed, but it'll be next week with Can Do. But I did follow up with the chair, and they were able to get a spiff request in by the end of last month. And so they're hopeful that that will go forward. But anyway, that will be the last presentation I'm responsible for, and that'll be next week.
Good work on that. Thank you. Debbie.
Yeah, I did do the grant neighborhood outreach, and everything went well. I think it was helpful because they've kind of forgotten a little bit about the SPIF grants, even though they've had them in the past, and decided that they're going to do a bigger one next year, and maybe even reach out to the Salem Parks Foundation. So I think it was helpful to remind them about that. And I also went to the Swan Neighborhood Association meeting, and they had a question for Rob about the dog park paving of the parking lot, and if we can get an update on what the plans are for that.
I'll give an update right now, but if I hear correctly, it's Swan's looking for an update, so we can definitely get one to them as well.
Well, just I was going to bring it back to him next month and just say any new timeline on that.
Yeah, let me just see if Aaron is still with us. No, he's not. Aaron is the project manager for that project, so that's why I asked that. We are currently, I just last week finished reviewing 90% design for that project, which is exciting. That means we're at the permitting stage, and our plan is to bid the project to a contractor early next year, January and February, and that their work will begin as soon as weather conditions allow in the late winter or early spring. So it really depends on the weather. As soon as we don't think we're going to get flooded out and the weather looks reasonably well, they're going to begin, and they're going to begin at one of the two parking lots. They're going to not do them both at once. And I'll have a little bit more information about kind of our plans to reduce the impacts to park users as much as we can. I think we're going to be developing a temporary parking area near parking lot 3 at the end of the road. However, we will not completely minimize the impacts, but we're going to mitigate them. There will be people are going to have a little patience with us as we make these really, I think, going to be some really welcomed improvements to the park.
Definitely. The other feedback I got from Swan was one of the people there that works with the parks that works with the Salem Parks Foundation was talking about the SPIF grants were just a lot more this year than they have been. I don't know the statistics on it, but I wondered if it was our outreach that helped a lot with increasing the SPIF grants.
I don't want to steal Jennifer Keller's thunder on that. I believe that she's going to plan to adjust that a bit when we get to the staff updates.
Any
That's
other?
correct.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say that's correct. I'll have share some information with that when we do the verbal updates.
Any other board updates, or should we move on into our verbal updates from staff? All right, I'll take that as the cue. So Rob or Jen, whoever wants to go first, please update away.
Maybe I'll go ahead and update since we've just been talking about the last couple board members have talked about SPIF. So I can just kind of update on that a little bit. This is probably the biggest response that we've had for the last few years. We received 14 letters of intent from 10 different neighborhood associations. So it was really quite a wide gamut by comparison to other years. Kind of breaking that down, if it's helpful, is the West Salem Neighborhood Association put in 2 different letter of intent applications, one for the Edgewater Parkway and one for West Salem Park. North Lancaster Neighborhood Association put in 1 letter of intent for Lansing Park. Northgate Neighborhood Association put in 2 letters of intent, one for Northgate Park and one for Stevens Yoshikai Park. Morningside Neighborhood Association put in 1 for future Fairview Park. Can Do, 1 for the Pringle Pathway to Riverfront. Swan, 1 for Nelson Park. Scan for Fairmount. Nen, 2 for McRae Park and Inglewood Park, one for each of those 2 parks. Sunny Slope put in 2, maybe 3. One of theirs was one was for Sunny Slope Park, one was for Sunny Slope and maybe Secor. So it's 14, 15-ish, depending on if it expands to Secor. And then the last one, Southeast Salem Neighborhood Association put in 1 for Richmond. So I won't tonight talk about the specific projects. We just met today relative to those letters of intent. And so next month I'll bring back kind of what those projects look like. In our discussions today, I will say I want to have opportunity. I need to respond to the neighborhood associations and let them know the outcome of that review. So I want to have an opportunity to do that before I kind of share it in a public forum tonight. So the preponderance of them, there was support to move forward on. A couple of them there was not. They're really for a couple of different reasons weren't appropriate for SPIF projects. So I'll have more detail next month with regard to the specificity of those projects. And we'll be working until the end of the calendar year, getting some estimates together, providing those to neighborhood associations so that they have opportunity in January. That's the next kind of deadline for them to submit final applications, to which the SPIF committee will review in February and disperse award amounts to them. So that's where we are with SPIF. Any questions?
Just that it's great to hear. I know that some years we don't get as many, so I'm glad to hear there's so many applications overall.
Right. And we were really happy too, again, with the kind of the diversification of the neighborhood associations that were involved. This is kind of the largest amount of kind of neighborhood, sometimes you'll have a neighborhood association that puts in for 1 or 2 or 3, thing, but having 10 neighborhood associations submit again has been much more significant than it has been in past years. So I do think the outreach is helpful.
Great.
All right, Rob, any updates from you?
Yeah, I'm gonna just highlight two projects real quick. A Gear Park, couple things, exciting things happening there. In December, staff will be going to City Council to ask for a exception to the standard procurement process for construction projects. We're hoping to do a design build approach to the skate park, and this is a common practice for skate parks as we've looked at how other cities have constructed them. And what that essentially means is what we're gonna, if the City Council authorizes us, we would put out an RFP to a designer who would then potentially become the contractor as well for the skate park. And the kind of advantages of this approach is that it could make the delivery of the final skate park happen quicker. It can also reduce some of the risk to the city in terms of the project turning out poorly. And also just add that, you know, I how familiar you all are with skate parks, that they get concrete to form and pour in ways that I just couldn't comprehend how they would do that. And so it is really an art form, and I personally would feel much more comfortable going through this RFP process to get a very qualified contractor involved. Also related to Gear Park, some of you may recall earlier this year, the city entered into a agreement with the state to do a land transfer, that kind of a complicated agreement, but at the end of it all, the city would end up owning Gear Park, when currently most of it is leased to the city, is owned by the state. The land use process, all that survey work and that complicated, you know, stuff that needs to transpire in order for that to happen, that has kicked off finally. So we have a consultant team, surveyors out doing all that work, and so I'm excited that is making some notable progress. And I want to highlight Fairview Park just briefly. The city has initiated a revisit of the Fairview Park Master Plan as we prepare to make some serious investments into in that park in the coming years. Ray and I attended a pop-up, or we held a pop-up event with consultants a couple Saturdays ago, and that event was actually at the park, and we were focusing our efforts to reach the surrounding neighborhood. A lot of those residents are new residents, the new housing that wasn't there when the original master plan was completed in 2016. And we had a pretty good turnout. We had around 70 people show up and visit us and participate in our outreach effort there. We also launched a survey at that same day, and that survey has got about 300 responses so far, and that's a good chunk of info we have there. Some of the themes we're seeing as we begin this outreach on this project is kind of what's most important to the community for this park is trails. That's definitely top of the list, is trails, and preserving open space and preserving the trees. Nature play is another one, and that's kind of a play areas developed out of natural materials. Generally, that's the concept there. Another one that is seems pretty popular is pickleball. That's the other one we're seeing there. And the dog park is up there, but it's not quite as strong as the other items I mentioned. So we're continuing our outreach there. Ray and the consultants are going to be doing some targeted outreach with the organization called Willamette Academy. They're associated with Willamette University, but they reach out to historically unrepresented community segments, and so that's a really good opportunity for us to reach those folks, young people who are from these historically underserved communities. We're hoping to get some interesting feedback there as well. And then as we enter into January, we're actually going to start the design process on that and come up with some concepts, and then we'll go back out to the community and get some feedback on those. So that's some awesome work that's going on.
And you're all in the new building, as I mentioned, right? Is that all in that? Remind everyone that's over off Mission Street, right?
Yes. I'm going to drop our building address in the chat in case anyone wants to stop by. This Monday, the building officially opened to the public. It is the city's operations building. It's park and recreation is in the building, as well as a lot of public works operations staff as well. You can come here to pay your water bill and to see the park staff, of course, if you want to hang out with us. So I'll drop our our actual physical address in the chat. And it's located on 23rd Street, really close to, or it's attached to the shop complex, the city shop complex, if you know where that is. It is just a quick selling points of this building. It is you may have read the press release on the city website, and that's definitely a better source than me, but it is a timber structure that's designed to be re-inhabited after a major earthquake. So you know, the building would be back up and running kind of right away. That's the idea. It has some interesting features such as backup power. The building is hooked up to a microgrid that's owned by PGE. So if the power goes out in the city, we'll still be up and running. And even if that runs out of power, the building also has a backup generator on top of that. So the idea is when there's emergencies in that Public Works and Park staff have to respond to, this building will be there to serve the community. And it is a awesome building. I encourage you guys to stop by if you haven't been there yet.
Wonderful. Any other questions for Rob? All right, hearing none. Let's move on to went through board member updates. Any new business folks want to flag? Hearing none. Oh, Alan, did you have new business? Sorry, I see were you talking? I just want to make sure you're on mute there. Nope. Okay. Wanted to make sure that wasn't directed at us. So that's everything we have on the agenda. And I just want to say, while the meeting went a little long tonight, I really appreciate how engaged everyone was. I think it's great when we have the conversations like we had earlier, really honing in on some of the feedback, the advisory aspect of it for the city processes, and hopefully that'll come back to us. And really appreciate everyone's willingness to serve on the steering committee so we can get the Parks for All plan in a really good spot. So thank you all for your leadership, for your service, and I hope everyone has a wonderful night, and we'll see you next month. The meeting is adjourned.